Hey now, we are getting over, and I am the Silver King, Adam Silverstein, here to lead you through these hard times. With episode 647 of your favorite professional wrestling podcast. That's right, Getting Over is back once again, and it is Thursday, so you know exactly what that means. We will discuss everything that happened over the last week in NXT and AEW. This week, though, is far more newsworthy than most because NXT debuted on the CW and AEW inked an updated media rights contract with Warner Brothers Discovery. That's a teaser off the top. We're going to get to all of that momentarily. Before we do, allow the Silver King to remind you that the Getting Over Wrestling podcast
is all about the five.
So please head on over to Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Leave a 5-star rating on Apple. Take a little extra time. Leave a 5-star written review. If you do, we will read it live right here on the show. Don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube at Getting Overcast and follow us on Twitter at Getting Overcast for episode drops, news, analysis, highlights, all of that good stuff. Please also remember,
I happen to love the number 5.
and I hope you do as well, because for $5 a month or $50 for the entire year, you can become an official Getting Overhead. Just visit buymeacoffee.com/gettingover. Sign up. You will get bonus audio, the fastest 5 minutes in professional wrestling, instant reactions to every major show, and on Fridays, exclusive news and analysis posts. All of that for $5 a month, $50 for the entire year. Buymeacoffee.com/gettingover. Please support the continuation of the Getting Over Wrestling podcast. Now, as I said off the top, there's a lot to talk about on today's show. Here's the rundown that we're going to use just so everyone is on the same page. We're going to start off discussing AEW's new media rights deal. Then we will break down NXT's debut on the CW. Next, we'll talk about AEW's 5th anniversary Dynamite and the rest of AEW television this week. And we will wrap up the show with a ratings discussion, given the numbers for both shows were particularly relevant this week. There will, as always, be timestamps in the episode description for every single segment, so you can skip around if you desire. But as always, I hope you listen to the entire show, especially this week. So like I said, all of that is still to come.
But I'm afraid I've got some news.
And actually, again, to start,
But I'm afraid I've got some bad news.
because there are 2 tough items off the top here before we get to the new media rights deal. Luchasaurus, now known as Killswitch, real name Austin Madelson, was recently hospitalized after being found having collapsed at home by his wife. This according to Fightful. Apparently, his blood oxygen level was dangerously low. He was diagnosed with pneumonia in both lungs. He's going to be out of action for a while. He's on oxygen right now. That recovery is obviously something that needs to be monitored for a period of time. From a wrestling standpoint, although that is far less important, how does that impact any potential plans they might have had with Christian Cage holding, I was going to say the briefcase, but the contract for an AEW title opportunity? All of that is up in the air, but what is most important is that Austin gets better as soon as possible. So obviously we here at Getting Over wish him nothing but the best. In similarly upsetting news, Sammy Guevara was stretchered out of the 5th anniversary Dynamite taping after seemingly getting knocked out cold during an ROH taping before the main show began. There was also a woman who fought Lady Frost who appeared to similarly get knocked out. Again, wish the best to both of them. In addition to Ty Mello's pregnancy, one reason Guevara was out for so long is because he was recovering from a concussion. So that's a particularly concerning situation for him in particular, given the concussion past. We've had many conversations about this on the podcast. Obviously, I'm a Miami Dolphins fan, so I've been dealing with everything with Tua Tagovailoa and his concussion symptoms and trying to explain to people in my real life and on my personal Twitter account, which, by the way, is at Silverstein Adam, EIN, Silverstein Adam. The specifics of that and how prevalent concussions have been, of course, in football always, but in wrestling as well. It's something that is finally starting to get the attention it has long deserved and finally being treated with the seriousness that it always deserved. So the best wishes to Sammy. And unfortunately, I don't know the other woman who got knocked out, but best wishes, of course, to her as well. Now, obviously, that was some bad news at the start of the show. Let's get to the rest of the news. And the big item this week is that AEW and Warner Brothers Discovery on Wednesday, hours before the 5th anniversary Dynamite, as we've expected and as we've told you guys would be coming for weeks, they announced a multi-year media rights contract extension without a value shared from them. What we can confirm, Getting Over can confirm, it is a 3-year deal with an option for a 4th year. What others have reported, and we cannot confirm, is sums of $170 million a year and $185 million a year, both of which are substantial figures. The original report from Variety said $150 million a year or more. So that is your range, somewhere between $150 and $185. I've heard it's closer to $170, but again, nothing that I can specifically confirm at this time. What I can also confirm, though, is there is a strong belief out there that Warner does have a non-voting financial stake in AEW that it retained as part of this deal. Now, you may hear others take full-throated stances on the quality of this deal in either direction. This is great for AEW. This is disappointing for AEW. I don't see how the latter could possibly be the case. But in terms of calling it great, it's actually extremely difficult to claim that without having more details. And really, no one seems to have those right now. What is most important is that this deal makes AEW profitable in year 5 onward, at least for the next 3 years, which was always the primary goal. How profitable is another one of those questions that is impossible to know because AEW is not publicly traded and its balance sheets are not publicly available. We can guesstimate pay-per-view revenue. We do not know what their roster budget looks like, nor can we ascertain whether they are making or losing money on certain TV events given their struggles to sell tickets. So let's discuss what we know and what we don't know and evaluate the deal based on that. This primarily features 4 components: Dynamite, Collision, pay-per-views, and Max streaming. Dynamite will remain on TBS. Collision will remain on TNT, both in their same time slots. Both will also stream live simultaneously on Max. That is a huge improvement for fans. It is also something, interestingly enough, that WWE does not have. Now, there are a variety of reasons why that is the case. Some will say this is better. Some will say this is worse in terms of contract value. But those are the decisions that have been made by NBC Universal when it comes to now the continuation of SmackDown on its network. Of course, they have announced that the WWE Saturday Night's main event specials that are airing on NBC will be simulcast live on Peacock. So that is almost an exception to the rule. Furthermore, back to AEW, Max will also house the AEW TV archives, which makes that subscription seemingly more valuable. Personally, I don't really go back and watch TV episodes hardly ever, and it does not seem as if old pay-per-views will be available there, which is problematic because that's actually where the real value exists. People do go back and watch pay-per-views. They don't really go back and watch TV shows. Where the evaluation gets complicated is factoring in the pay-per-views, because this deal is not $170 million for 4 hours of television, and it should not be treated as such. Starting in late 2025, so maybe a year from now, all pay-per-views will be available on Max, with AEW primarily promoting them on that platform. Makes all the sense in the world. Those pay-per-views will be available at a discount to customers, though we don't know the price of the discount. And it appears on the surface that this is a hybrid of the WWE deal with Peacock and the UFC deal with ESPN. For WWE, every PLE is free with a Peacock subscription. For UFC, every pay-per-view is full price, and you have to subscribe to ESPN Plus in order to get access to it. Now, my understanding, and I try to get modern confirmation of it, this was my understanding when the deal happened, is that ESPN bought out the UFC pay-per-view rights to the point that they earn all of the revenue from those sales. So UFC gets a lump sum no matter how the pay-per-views perform, and ESPN ideally profits beyond that figure. In addition to that, they profit from all the subscriptions they have to sell so people have access to the pay-per-views. With AEW and Max, you will need to at least subscribe to Max to have access to the pay-per-views. However, Max also has a new sports tier that they will soon start charging $9.99 a month to access, just for the sports tier, and you already have to subscribe to get the sports tier. Will fans need to subscribe to both to get AEW? If so, you're looking at $20 a month with ads, $27 a month without ads, $31 a month if you want 4K streaming. If you need to subscribe to both, will the pay-per-views be part of that cost or a separate charge still on top of that? So we don't know how much we as consumers will be paying, but we do know that every dime going directly to Max does not go to AEW. I'm talking about the subscription part of it. Then there's the question of the pay-per-views themselves. Is Warner paying AEW a lump sum for all of those shows like ESPN does UFC? Or will they be splitting revenue for each pay-per-view where AEW can earn beyond the terms of their deal? The reason that is important is because right now, AEW earns approximately 50% of the revenue that it brings in from each pay-per-view. They generate about $6 million per show, $50 times 120,000 buys. Sometimes it's higher, sometimes it's lower. I don't know whether that includes international or it doesn't. If it does, there might be some lower costs there. Again, that's a guesstimate, $6 million per show. So AEW brings in about $3 million per show or $27 million per year. Again, rough estimates. Is that $27 million part of this $170 million? If so, the deal does not look as good. Can they earn $27 million or even a portion of that? Maybe the split is changed and now they get 25% of the revenue. Can they get $10 million more on top of that $170 million? If so, the deal looks even better. Either way, I do question the figure on Warner's behalf. It's less than was initially rumored, but it comes across as more significant than I expected, given the way the ratings are going. Plus, who exactly was Warner's competition in reality for AEW? It kind of feels like they bid against themselves and maybe even overpaid a tad. Maybe they panicked over losing the NBA, maybe not. They are building out their sports portfolio. Maybe they figured they need to have professional wrestling as part of it and they're willing to spend a little bit more to get it. But again, the value proposition for AEW completely depends on the pay-per-view component. If they bought those out and are going to recoup those expenditures, I'm talking about Warner here, in subscriptions and pay-per-view buys, it makes a lot more sense. If they're going to get the subscription component, but they're still going to split revenue of those pay-per-views 50-50 with AEW, that's better for AEW, and it makes even less sense for Warner. That is why it's impossible to evaluate this deal on the surface. We know AEW is becoming profitable. We don't know how profitable. We know this is a good deal and a huge increase from what they were being paid previously. But we don't know if there's earning potential beyond the raw numbers. Getting into the black is one thing. Earning sustainable profit is necessary for long-term growth and success as well. What this deal absolutely does, no matter how you slice it, it gives AEW a 3-year runway. Now, I'm sure Tony Khan probably wanted a 5-year deal at a higher number, but there is a silver lining to a shorter contract. And that is that AEW is now going to hit the market again before WWE's new deals are up. If ratings and attendance continue to dwindle, that could theoretically be bad for AEW. It could decline the option, Warner could, and they may not get a lucrative TV deal elsewhere. There's also the potential for the media rights bubble to burst. That could be problematic as well. However, if ratings and attendance increase, or even if they just kind of maintain, it could be hugely positive for them because they would be able to get first crack at new deals before WWE comes to market. For those of you who follow college football, You've seen this work both ways recently. The Big 12 got to market early before the Pac-12. It secured a really nice payday. The Pac-12 was left with scraps and basically imploded. Conversely, the SEC got to market before the Big 10. The SEC signed a hugely lucrative contract with ESPN. But having seen what they did, the Big 10 ended up blowing it away by signing 3 contracts with 3 separate networks for notably more money. This despite SEC being, the better conference when it comes to winning national championships of late. And in terms of the average quality of the on-field program, I know there's probably a lot of you who are Big 10 fans throwing up middle fingers. You like Ohio State or Penn State or Michigan, or I guess these days USC or UCLA. You guys know the SEC has been more successful recently. Let's get back to the topic. But that's where the 3-year runway comes in for AEW. The first contract was about proving it. This contract is about sustaining it. Will they be able to sustain it? That is what is left to be determined. Now, the final component to discuss here are rumors about AEW speaking with Fox and Warner no longer having TV exclusivity with AEW. At this juncture, I am taking a believe it when I see it approach when it comes to the idea of AEW Shockwave, which is what the show is being called, moving to Tuesday or Thursday on network television. I'm not saying it's impossible, but if that was to transpire, you're talking about 6 hours of AEW TV per week, and the Shockwave deal, that show being on network, you have to assume that becomes the A show, and it takes precedence over Dynamite and Collision. I cannot see Warner being pleased with that, given the payout that they are sending to AEW, primarily for Dynamite. And speaking with the few connections I have in the TV landscape, I've heard that any talks between AEW and Fox are preliminary at best. Exploratory is actually the word I think was given to me when I asked. Could it happen? Sure. Will it happen? I have no idea. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me on Fox's part. I've seen mentions of Tubi as a possibility. Maybe. There's one element that I have yet to see a single person discuss, but I will. And that's syndication. It is possible the talks between AEW and Fox are for a syndicated show that could be picked up and aired as local stations desire, similar to what's actually happening with the Women of Wrestling promotion. They have a syndication deal with Paramount. By me, that airs Saturday at 1 p.m. and 11 p.m. in Oklahoma City, just a random location I Googled to try to figure out when it airs there. It airs Sunday at 4 p.m. and 10:30 p.m. It airs different times in different locations. That would be much less stressful when it comes to AEW creative, and it could be Fox or whomever dipping their toe in to say, hey, could this potentially work? And can we get some value out of it without having to give it 2 hours on a Tuesday night or a Thursday night? I'm not saying syndication happens. It's what came to mind to me when I was thinking about how the hell would this actually work with AEW and Fox. Otherwise, I just don't see how AEW can sustain 6 hours of TV per week with Dynamite being the B show to potentially Shockwave as the A show on Fox. And that's not even counting Ring of Honor. AEW is already oversaturated television-wise at 5 hours. Rampage is completely worthless and it's going away. That's great. Collision, sometimes you get 45 minutes of valuable content. Sometimes you get 15 minutes. There have been episodes where you get 0. Going to 6 hours with one roster, it seems like the definition of a company stretching itself too thin. So that is where I stand with all of this right now. The new media rights deal is a substantial increase. It makes AEW profitable. That's great. How much of an increase? It's kind of unknown without the details for the pay-per-view component. And also, how profitable it's going to be is impossible to know because we don't have access to the financials. It is similarly difficult to compare this deal to any of WWE's contracts. Netflix is completely unique. It includes international streaming. NBC Universal includes 4 TV specials, and it may actually get increased, that figure, if SmackDown does expand to 3 hours. The CW is for 1 2-hour show per week. That's it. Peacock is pretty much now only for PLEs. There's no telling what's happening to this on-demand content now or in the future. I've been trying to get answers for that. So The one thing this does highlight for WWE, and I've said this on the show before, it really does seem like the CW got a bargain for NXT. And we're going to talk more about this later when we discuss ratings for that show. But even with the additional components to the AEW deal, it feels like whatever is earmarked for Dynamite is beyond what WWE is getting for NXT, despite the ratings being almost identical at this point. We don't technically know the amount of that deal. I've heard upwards of $35 million. And you know what? We've spoken enough about this. That's the perfect transition into the next part of today's show. We will follow up with any additional thoughts or details about the AEW media rights deal in future episodes. And if any of you out there have questions of your own that you want us to answer, send them in, Jerome's. You can email us, gettingoverpod@gmail.com. You can always tweet and DM us at gettingovercast on Twitter. So with all of that said, we're going to move into the TV show breakdowns. We're going to talk NXT, then AEW, and then after both of those, we will discuss the ratings for Tuesday and Wednesday, the first NXT on the CW, and the AEW 5-year anniversary of Dynamite. Timestamps in the episode description, as always. Now, starting with NXT, obviously a ton of changes moving to the CW. Let's start with the logo and graphics package that we got for the show. I love the chromed out look. Major Oakland Raiders vibes from me. And that speaks to me as a teenager from the 90s. It's also very similar to the No Mercy graphic from this year. Now, I figured they were going to lean on the orange of the CW logo. This stands out more, and it's totally different than all the colorful stuff that you get in wrestling. What I also appreciated is that the original NXT yellow gold color is being used as an accent for all the graphics packages. So it's mostly new, but there is a hint of old in there. There was also an aesthetic choice made with the ring mat. I believe it's slightly darker, a little bit more gray than what NXT was using previously. The theme song for NXT is Millions From Now by 2 Chainz and Lil Wayne. Hot song, only about a year old. Way better than Megan Thee Stallion, but also not as popular, so kind of a little bit more of an underground feel. I just didn't expect, probably ever, that a Wayne song would lead into a wrestling show. So that popped me right from the start. You all know I've been a proponent of wrestling leaning on rap and hip hop and away from rock. And I like the direction WWE is going with it. It speaks to me directly, and certainly a large portion of the audience as well. At the same time, they aren't picking the most exciting rap songs. Millions From Now, for example, the guys kind of mumble on the track a bit. It's low energy. WWE needs to use upbeat rap so that the transition into the show comes with energy, which is not really the case either for the new SmackDown or NXT themes, despite both of them being eons better than what WWE had been using previously. Only other items I wanted to discuss before we get into all of it come from the CW specifically. In terms of picture quality, the CW for me showed up through YouTube TV as 1080p enhanced, which is usually good. All the commercials were really sharp. The NXT picture itself was kind of grainy and dull throughout the entire show. I'm not sure why that was the case, but it didn't look great. Maybe that was just my feed. You all can tell me if you saw similar issues. Also, and we noted this previously, we saw many elements during NXT that we previously experienced with SmackDown on Fox. Overly muted holy shit chants, no picture-in-picture commercial breaks, and no overrun, ending at 10 p.m. Eastern flat. None of those are ideal, but the shift to network TV is probably worth it for the brand in the end. And we told you that this show would not have an overrun. The CW has news in most locations at 10 p.m., so they have to end that on time. But what was notable to me is they ended it like late at 10 o'clock. So let's say like 10 p.m. and 49 seconds, as opposed to cutting it off 2 or 3 minutes early like Fox always would to get to the late local news. So that is the overview of the NXT presentation. Let's get to what actually happened on the show. Shawn Michaels opened NXT on the CW with a podium clearly featuring new championships in the ring. The titles were all chromed out, silver and gold, with a black strap for the men, white for the women. Just as HBK was wrapping up, Triple H emerged to drop his signature, "Are you ready?" I've seen a lot of people like clowning Paul Levesque that he thrusts himself into everything front and center in WWE. And I think when it comes to the main roster, that's fair. But when it comes to NXT, this was completely appropriate. It was an awesome start to the show. You had NXT old heads get their Triple H. You had the newbies get Shawn Michaels. Don't forget, Triple H used to kick off every single takeover and every major NXT event that exact way. So seeing those guys together, even though it's not unusual for Shawn and Trips to be together, obviously, it was pretty special overall. As far as the new championships go, I didn't love them at first glance on TV. Second glance on WWE Shop, honestly, not that much better. They're octagonal, which reminds of those ugly ass UFC titles. Don't get it twisted. These are better than those by a significant margin, but the shape is similar. They're just kind of bland. They're clear downgrades from the colorful titles. I'd like to see the real titles in a different light, such as backstage. That would help draw a more firm conclusion. Because you guys remember, even on the main roster, when they debut new titles, you see them initially, they're all washed out by the lights, and you're like, don't love it. But then you see someone carrying it backstage, and you're like, oh shit, that actually looks pretty damn good. They do seem to be boring downgrades off the jump, even thematically. I just feel like they could have done better than what they presented. But those are titles, and they're not really the end of the world. Let's move to the main event. The NXT Championship was on the line. Ethan Page defending against Trick Williams. Special guest referee CM Punk had a meeting of the minds backstage with Ava, confirming he would call it right down the middle. This started hot with Punk laying down the law, stopping both guys from breaking the rules. The crowd chanted for or against all three guys throughout the match. Trick got thrown through the barricade early. Williams also took an ego's edge through the announce table with some really weird audio feedback and muted holy shit chants. Trick hit a pump knee back inside with Ethan collapsing on him in a callback to how Page initially won the title. Punk dragged both of them to their feet for a brawl before Williams landed a bookend. Trick shot missed, so Page hit a pump knee for a near fall and then started arguing with Punk. Page then hit Williams with go to sleep while staring at Punk for a 2.5. Trick escaped ego's edge and fell into Punk's arms. So Punk placed him gently in the corner like a baby. And then Williams bounced out of it, hitting Trick shot to win the NXT title. The crowd erupted after the bell. Trick celebrated. Tons of confetti went off. And Page shoved Punk. He was angry he lost the title. So as NXT was going off the air and the credits were rolling, in the background, you could see Punk hit Page with go to sleep to end the program. Now, the ending was absolutely rushed. You could see Punk say something to Williams as he walked by late in the match, like, you need to go now. And perhaps it is because of that. But yeah, this was disappointing. There's not really another way to put it. The wrestling between them just wasn't good. It was clunky in parts, slow in others. No real match story outside of Punk, who was the referee and neither the champion nor the challenger. I didn't love the finish either. It was meant to give Page an excuse, but Punk didn't do much of anything to create the situation. And a single trick shot beating Page was just weak, mostly because, and I've said this many times here on the show, it absolutely sucks as a finisher. It makes no sense for a guy with that size and strength and charisma to use a pump knee that doesn't even properly connect most of the time. Regarding Trick, you all know we're fans of his, and we have been supporting this dude since day one. But this is his second NXT title reign, and he's still green as hell in the ring. Charisma is main roster level. Promo work is halfway there. Overall character, I'd say, is mostly there, 3/4 there. In ring is not even close at this juncture. He still struggles to do long matches himself. He needs a lot more work. Maybe putting the title back on him will help. We've seen that help with other people before, but I'm just personally not seeing much progress in ring over the last 5 months. He should be there at least another year and a half because this dude has a long way to go to be a capable in-ring wrestler on the main roster. And I will repeat, that is despite me absolutely loving his charisma and thinking he can be a major main event star in WWE. The in-ring work has to improve. Now, obviously, this is what we're discussing first from NXT, so you may find me being overly critical. I actually loved the remainder of the show. I just thought this was one of the weakest parts, which was disappointing because it was the main event and it was the biggest news item. Not helping matters is that the show cut off right when it was over because they had to rush it. So we got a title win, but we didn't even get a big deserved celebration from him. I'm going to say 3 stars, B-. Maybe you could go 3.25 B, but it wouldn't be any higher than that. The NXT Women's Championship, Roxanne Perez defending against Julia. This kicked off the show. The cherry blossoms were gone from Julia's entrance, replaced with snakes or serpents or something, but she did honor Hana Kimura with her gear. Tons of counters to start, commercial after 3 minutes. This was 12 minutes into the show, by the way. Julia did a headbutt barrage and a unique hammerlock cradle suplex. Roxy came back with a tope suicida, but Julia hit a double underhook superplex with a bridge. Perez countered Rings of Saturn into a pinning combination, then moved into a crossface. Julia countered that into an STF. Then she countered Pop Rocks into a pump knee, only for Roxy to hit it with Julia rolling outside the ring. She caught Perez with a Northern Lights bomb ringside. Roxy grabbed her title, then did a tug of war with the referee as someone in a black hooded jacket ran in and DDT Julia ringside. One of the best sells of the entire year by Julia. She sold that like death. Perez capitalized with Pop Rocks, and she retained the title in 13 minutes as Cora Jade revealed herself on the ramp after the bell. They had kind of a knowing stare down. Both of them smiled a little bit, but it didn't seem like it was planned between them. Later backstage, Cora cut an interview promo putting herself over. Roxy came up asking what the hell her interference was all about. Jade said she wanted people to remember she runs the division and she liked the woman Perez had become. Roxanne replied, "Hey, we have a common enemy. Maybe this will actually bring us together." Now, this booking made it make sense that the match opened NXT as opposed to main evented. While Cora's return was welcome and it was a good excuse for Julia, that's not exactly how you would want to end a debut show with an interference finish in a title match, unless that interference came from like a major star or a debutante or something like that. It was unfortunate to a degree because this was running super hot until the finish, to the point that I was on my way to like maybe even a high A grade if it just continued at that pace for another 5, 6, 7 minutes. It was really strong showing from Julia, who was clearly still growing comfortable in WWE. Her strikes are not as hard as they used to be in Stardom, nor as hard as they could be, even being safer in WWE. She will get there. In terms of the decision to keep the title on Roxy, that is the right call. Spoke about this on last week's show. Ideally, you do not want someone coming into a territory and winning the title right away, especially from a really strong champion. Ethan Page was an exception to the rule, and even that felt fast. But you especially don't want to do it if it means someone like Perez suddenly wouldn't have anything to do. Not sure how long they can keep her in NXT because her talent is so immense, but a call-up certainly is not necessary until the next WWE draft at the earliest. I'm right on the border, 89, 90 out of 100 if you were kind of doing it, 3.75 stars B+, 4 stars A-. Again, right on that border. Clearly, I was wrong about the results of both titles matches, but really, what are you going to do? There was something else that made me laugh here. I don't know if you guys had the same reaction I did. So Cora pulls the hood back to reveal herself. And then she unzips her jacket and like jacks it open to reveal with emphasis, let's say, her enhancements.
They look good, but she's got me saying, "Hey now!"
Now, they weren't new or anything, but I just kind of chuckled at how dramatic she was doing it, because usually if you're going to rip off a jacket or something, you're going to reveal like a faction shirt. But instead, it was something else. Maybe it was only funny to me. Anyway, in terms of what happens here going forward, obviously Julia versus Cora will be a match. Depending when Stephanie Vaquer debuts, you could see her team up with Julia against Roxy and Cora. That makes a lot of sense. You could also see Cora help Roxy retain against Stephanie in similar fashion and wind up with a triple threat. Or we could see Jade turn on Perez sooner than later. If memory serves, Cora was supposed to be in this spot as champion before getting injured. So they could run to get that story arc back on track and then go from there. Either way, involving those 4 plus the forthcoming debut of Delta and then the rest of the stacked women's roster, that creates a super interesting division. And speaking of Delta, there was a teaser vignette for her on this show. You could only see her long red hair and her build. If she was walking out of the desert, I guess the outback, technically in this case, down like a desolate roadway, taking an off-ramp to NXT. The highways on the sign were 10 and 27, referring to 10/27, the date of NXT Halloween Havoc. So that is when Delta will debut in WWE. Wes Lee fought Zach Wentz in a street fight. TNA chants at the bell, but no graphic on screen, probably to avoid confusion for the show's debut. Lee brought out a shopping cart with weapons, so Wentz drove it into the steel steps. Tons of chair shots, including a hurricanrana into a pile of them, along with a double dive into some plywood. Wentz did coast to coast with a trash can into Lee, and we got the return of the 30-second network TV mutes for holy shit. This was the first time that we heard it. West took a gnarly bump headfirst into a chair on the ropes, then got kendo sticked and stomped with a trash can around his body before Wentz did an absolute batshit full back swanton bomb into West with a trash can between them. They went to do a springboard shove off the ropes through a table that was to counter the UFO, but Wentz jumped too far and careened off the table. Luckily, he was okay. West did a springboard double stomp with Zach on a chair. Each then wrapped a chain around their fists and punched one another. Wentz raised a chair, so West low blowed him, punched him a bunch with the chain, and then wrapped the chain around his knees for a meteora through Wentz, seated in a chair, for the clean win, considering it was in a street fight. Super entertaining from bell to bell. Better than their first match by a significant margin, though the finish was a little bit disappointing. The chemistry between them is apparent. That allowed them to beat the ever-loving shit out of each other. Some of the spots were gnarly. I wish this was the end of the feud, but you have to assume Trey Miguel is going to want to get his. I actually thought this slightly under-delivered from a creativity standpoint, just given the capabilities of both guys, but hot action, well placed on the show. 4 stars, A-. I actually understand if you have it higher and you think I'm being low on that. Miz TV happened with Oba Femi and Tony D'Angelo as guests. Miz was back heel, getting booed during his introduction. Tony D said a lot of platitudes about himself, getting what chance from the crowd. He paused to kind of look them off, and it actually worked, but the promo didn't really do that much. Oba replied saying Tony doesn't believe the words coming out of his mouth, and he knows he'll never become North American champion. The larger crowd did the grunts for Femi, but he didn't cut his promo with the pauses so that they really had effect. D'Angelo revealed that he grew up in the streets of Chicago, which led to chants and cheers. Femi shot back about what happened last time they fought. That led to a face-to-face. Tony said he's just a man. Oba replied, he's inevitable. And some doubt crept in there for Tony at the end. This was a much better segment than I expected. But if Tony is from Chicago and they're running him as a babyface, why would this not have been revealed earlier with the match taking place in the Windy City? I guess they wanted to split the title defenses among the two shows. I get that. But the street fight could have easily been run in St. Louis instead, especially with the smaller crowd. Coming out of this, I still don't see why NXT would put the title on Tony D. Oba could get moved into the main event, and the main event is thin, but he's still so green that it's unnecessary to take that leap at this juncture. I'd be more interested in D'Angelo losing and altering his character, somehow making the gimmick more modern and believable, than him winning and beating Femi for him to do what exactly? Someone has to beat Oba eventually. I don't think it should be Tony D. Lola Vice and Jada Parker fought JC Jane and Fallon Henley. The faces, who were just recently heels, mind you, argued backstage about who was going to take the lead. Connie Jordan came in to play peacemaker, but when it didn't work, she said she had a backup plan. Jada stacked the heels and hit a double teardrop before Vice did a double hip attack. The faces distracted themselves throughout the match by continuing to argue. Jasmine Nix distracted Parker, who got bounced off the apron accidentally by Vice. It was the second time she took friendly fire, so Jada walked out on her. Lola went on a run with her MMA kicks, but JC caught her with a rolling elbow, and they combined for like a double Shining Wizard almost for the win. The heels called out Jordan. She was on commentary, by the way. They called her out after the bell. She approached them only to reveal her special guest, her backup plan, Bianca Belair and Jade Cargill. They entered, destroyed Fatal Influence alongside Lani. Expected and correct winners as soon as we learned the competitors were JC and Fallon. We talked about that last week. They had to win if this group was going to have any shred of legitimacy. The match was solid too. Lola's fury of kicks at the end was kind of ridiculous. Henley obviously remains miscast with Influence, but at this point, what are you going to do? Bianca and Jade were a nice surprise, though it's a bit odd that Fatal Influence called them out and Lani pretty much simultaneously when Nyx isn't exactly a sensible contributor to either title opportunity. Lani again left a lot to be desired character-wise. I'm glad they're teaming up in trios next week. Maybe some of Bianca's personality and Jade's aura can kind of rub off on her from working together. Maybe they can give her some pointers. She definitely needs them. There was clearly a storyline change of some kind here. Because you may remember a few weeks ago, the Metaphor ladies said they were going after the women's tag team titles, wanting to challenge Bianca and Jade. And people really got excited about that matchup. You got to imagine one of them got injured or had something personal pop up, because the plan seemed to be them fighting a tag match for the titles in St. Louis, with Lonnie defending her title against one of the Fatal Influence members. Instead, they're just grouped together in a 6-woman tag. So again, clearly there had to be some type of adjustment for one reason or another. Javon Evans got a promo package sharing his excitement for facing Randy Orton, one of his idols. Orton said in a taped interview that he's heard great things about Evans and wants to test him while giving him the opportunity of a lifetime. Orton also admitted he had an ulterior motive. He wants to hit Evans with the most spectacular RKO someone could imagine. We talked about this last week or 2 weeks ago. Putting Javon over Randy would be absolutely wild. And I'd be here for it if they actually pulled the trigger. But it's just not necessary at the end of the day. Evans taking Orton to the limit and getting the Undertaker handshake out of respect, that will play just fine. Lexis King interrupted Punk backstage, saying he's trying not to be like Brian Pillman and instead wanted to be a better man. He asked for advice on how to do that. Punk said, you either have to decide to win at all costs or fight against your genetics. There was really nothing else to this. I thought it was funny that King is like, I'm conflicted between these two things. And Punk's answer to that was, here are the two things you're conflicted about. He didn't actually give him advice like, it is beneficial for you to win at all costs, or you should fight against your genetics because your dad was a great wrestler, but he was a problematic man, or, something, right? He didn't actually give him advice, but this was largely just a continuation of last week's storyline and pretty fun to see them together on the screen at the same time. For Axiom, we're playing WWE 2K in their apartment to prepare for their title match next week. Axiom talked about Nathan Frazier controlling his temperature. As he got pinned in the game, he lost his temper through his controller, which of course proved Axiom's point. This was a nice little, segue type of segment ahead of their title match next week, of which you should expect a retention and potentially the debut of Motor City Machine Guns. If they're going to do it, at the end of that segment makes all the sense in the world. In terms of NXT on the CW as a whole, this was far more like a mini PLE than a regular NXT episode. We got little in the way of the NXT high school teen drama shenanigans, but that's okay for a week or two, right? Because they're going to be in St. Louis at a smaller venue next week, and I am curious to see what happens there. They will be back at the WWE Performance Center in 2 weeks. There are rumors that has been renovated and changed, trying to get a little information on that. Maybe I'll have it next week. We'll find out. But overall, I would absolutely call the debut of NXT on the CW a success. Was it perfect? No. Could it have been better? Yes. But you know what, man? Not every episode is perfect. AEW Dynamite's 5th year anniversary wasn't perfect. Raw 25 wasn't perfect. I mean, you take what you can get, and this was a good show. Now, moving over to AEW, starting with our, relevancy score for the week. 8 of 18 matches, 44% were directly relevant to, storylines or ongoing feuds and not just random. That is better than average, certainly. Obviously worse than last week when we had a celebration here on the Getting Over Wrestling podcast for hitting 50%. The goal, of course, is 2/3 at a minimum, and AEW just has not approached that pretty much ever. This week, ironically, there were more relevant matches than usual on Collision and fewer than usual on Dynamite, despite it being the 5th anniversary episode of that show. And as far as that anniversary goes, we're going to break down all the matches within storylines along with Collision and Rampage as usual. I did want to note off the top, I was decently surprised at attendance for this show. It was under 5,000, despite being in Pittsburgh, a major city, in a venue where the capacity was well more than double that. So, even for a 5th anniversary Dynamite with some pretty huge matches on it, doing under 5,000 is just kind of disappointing. Now, before we actually get into the breakdown, I got a DM from Nick Flynn, longtime listener at @nflynn_17. He said, with 5 years of Dynamite under our belts, what do you think so far is the best moment in the show's history? Also, for fun, what happens to be the worst moment in Dynamite's history? So this is an interesting question because the worst moment is actually really easy and the best moment is tougher. There's actually something that happened on Collision this Saturday that is going to rank up there with one of the worst ever AEW moments when it comes to in-ring segments. But two moments on Dynamite stand out to me all time. One was the death match with the sparklers at the end. Really the entire way that thing was booked and conceptualized, the countdown to nothing, it was just horrendous and laughable and worthy of mockery. And I think even people within AEW would admit that was worthy of mockery. The other was the final scene from Dynamite in 2019. It was like mid-December, like 2 weeks before the end of the year, when Dark Order and all like the Gimps invaded and were unable to throw worked punches. It was the last scene in your mind as an AEW viewer for like 3 weeks before the show returned. And it was just as bad as wrestling gets and as bad as booking gets. And it all happened at the same time at the end of what you would think would be a pretty important show. Now, in terms of the best moments, they're actually tougher, not because there's few, but because most of the best moments are high quality matches. And separating one from another to definitively say it was the best or most exciting is tough. So what actually stands out to me as the best moment in the history of AEW Dynamite was the Celebration of Life episode for Brody Lee. It was extremely emotional and touching. Every single match on the card was good. I vividly remember the Hangman Page Dark Order match against Inner Circle standing out as great. And there was a catharsis that you felt once it ended. Now that I'm talking about it, it's pretty far and away the best moment. So, they deserved a lot of credit then for it, just for doing such a good job. And certainly even looking back on it now, I said earlier, I'm not someone who rewatches, TV shows or episodes of wrestling like that. I'll rewatch pay-per-views, but not really episodes. That's one. I'm not going to do it like when it first goes on Max or anything, but I could absolutely see at some point in the first year of that going back and watching that show. Let's go ahead and break down everything that happened across Dynamite, Collision, and Rampage this last week. Again, we go in storyline order, so things do get mixed up a little bit. That's why we're going to start with the segment from Collision. The Trios titles were on the line. BCC, if you want to call them that, and Pac beat Private Party and Commander in 7 minutes. The gimmick here was the question of whether Wheeler Yuta would defend them. Yuta refused to tag and contribute multiple times, even staring down Claudio Castagnoli at one point. He ultimately got involved when he got attacked, and he got the fall with cattle mutilation. He kept it locked in after the bell, with Claudio and Pac applauding him, though he didn't accept their praise. This did succeed in further character development for Yuta, no doubt. It also made the challengers look even more pathetic than they already were entering the match, basically losing to one dude who didn't even compete for the vast majority of the match, and then getting beaten seconds after he actually got into the ring. Dynamite opened with a taped BCC promo. Again, I don't know what this group is called. For some reason, they don't have a name. John Moxley, or actually it was Pac, said, "War is upon us and it's time to take sides." Pac spoke to an anonymous person who we eventually learned was Wheeler, saying he knows he's a lion and he's already chosen sides. Claudio said he and Mox are the same guys and he should just come home. Then Marina Shafir said a bunch of stuff in Russian before Mox said he wished Bryan Danielson didn't win the AEW title because now he has no choice but to take him out. He said he would give Bryan a gift to go out on his shield and die a warrior on his home soil. Well-produced, hard-hitting segment. I figured it would lead to more later in the show. The one thing that bothered me about it was the stuff Mox said about Bryan. He has not proven to be some, weak champion or someone who is just there to be happy and do good wrestling. He's battled through injury and been a badass and beat the shit out of some people. So you would think Mox would respect that in kayfabe. It really doesn't fit that he has a problem with the person Danielson is, either as champion, before he was champion, as a wrestler, whatever the case. On Collision, the Continental title was on the line. Kazuchika Okada beat Sammy Guevara to retain in 13 minutes. You'll recall there was no real reason for this challenge, though at least Guevara had a championship pedigree. Normally I'd talk more about this, but nothing about it was worthwhile. Odd choice to main event a show. There were better matches and moments on Collision. The best spot was Guevara countering a Rainmaker into a Spanish Fly, but then he ate one for the defeat. Now, it was announced on social media before Dynamite that Taz was attacked in the parking lot before the show. Gimmick infringement Jones over here. And also announced that Nigel McGuinness was rushing to Pittsburgh to replace him on commentary. The clear reason being that it was likely an excuse to get Nigel on commentary for the AEW title match. Hook backstage late on Dynamite mumbled through a promo saying he would go after whoever attacked his family. The only name that comes to my head is Samoa Joe, who would be a heel disappointed in Hook, losing or giving up the title. I'm trying to create a storyline here. I don't really have one. It could also be Christian Cage. He did cut a tape promo later in the show that said nothing, but he used the word hook when he said hook, line, and sinker. Those are the only two people I can kind of conceptualize as being involved in this. I guess a third could be Powerhouse Hobbs, who is cleared and might be coming back, and maybe because he was part of Team Taz, but Taz didn't live up to expectations or something, he takes him out. That's pretty much the only way I can go with this, and we'll see if this even is worthy of us discussing to this level in the future. But that moves us to a title versus title match that came out of nowhere. If you only follow AEW by listening to the show, you'd say, what the hell are you even talking about? Danielson defending his AEW title against Okada defending his Continental title. This match was booked literally for no reason. Obviously, it was an exciting booking because both guys are great wrestlers and their first two matches were good, but it was literally done for no reason whatsoever. Would have been sensible, I thought, for Bryan to give Darby Allin a title shot because he got screwed over by the man that Bryan hates and mocks. Instead, this was just another champion versus champion match, like the 13th or 14th one in the last couple of months. And it also came 1 week after Bryan wasn't sure whether he could even compete at Grand Slam, but now he's totally fine to fight Okada on Dynamite. Stupid babyface move on top of everything else. There was also a stipulation where Okada's title was only up for the first 20 minutes, given Continental rules. I saw people giving that shit. I had no problem with that. It fits with the rules of the title, made the match more interesting. So I thought that was pretty cool. Bryan, before the match, said he challenged Kazu because AEW is where the best wrestle. I need a sound drop that I can use every time that's said. I don't have one at the top of my mind. If any of you have suggestions, send them in, Jerome's at Getting Overcast on Twitter, gettingoverpod@gmail.com. The drops do not have to be from wrestling. They can be pop culture, movies, TV, whatever the case. If you have an idea of something I can use when where the best wrestle is said, please help out our soundboard. This started at 9:55 p.m., but Dynamite was booked for 2.5 hours. First half was dragged out in reality for time and in kayfabe because of the Okada stipulation. Okada hit the elbow drop and Danielson sold the arm he broke last time that happened, despite the likelihood of that happening twice being very slim. Bryan countered Rainmaker but failed on a triangle choke, countering into label lock at 19 minutes, then basically into Ring of Saturn for 30 seconds before a rope break. Danielson followed with a Bazaiku knee, but Okada rolled out of the ring to retain his Continental title. Danielson did a springboard cannonball ringside, which was awesome, but, yikes, because it's Danielson. Then Okada hit a tombstone pile driver on a chair that just happened to be laying there. Pace picked up. Okada avoided Bazaiku knee and hit Rainmaker, but was unable to cover. Then he took one to the chest, bouncing out of the corner, hitting the knee back on Bryan. Danielson similarly reversed Rainmaker. Okada did a nasty driver-style move. He hit Bryan with two Rainmakers, but didn't cover because he saw Claudio and Pac each one corner ringside. Danielson ducked a third Rainmaker and won with a simple backslide in 31 minutes. The match was great, as one would expect. AEW does have a habit of unnecessarily elongating matches to meet timelines. This was another example of it, but it was way less egregious than the MJF near draw a couple months back. Not sure how much there is to say about it. There was really no storyline coming in, and it was just high quality wrestling. The distraction backslide finish was super deflating because it was one of two major matches on the card, both of which ended in lackluster fashion. The bouts between them have been good, meaning Bryan and Okada, but each of them have left something to be desired given they're legitimate legends and they've had better matches against other people, many better matches against many other people. I was on my way to maybe a high A here, but ultimately the way the match started, those first 20 minutes and then the finish, it has me down at 4.25 stars A, and that's just based on all the parameters we've discussed myriad times here on the podcast. The numbers are relevant, though. It was high quality wrestling on an anniversary show. But was it memorable? Is it something I will ever watch or think about again? Not at all. In fact, none of their three matches have been, which is actually kind of disappointing if you think about it, just given the ability and status of both guys. Now, Okada grabbed Danielson after the bell for an extra Rainmaker. Then he flicked off both guys, Pac and Claudio. Those are probably the fourth and fifth middle fingers we saw on the 2.5 hours of Dynamite alone. Then he left and Claudio and Pac grabbed Bryan's arms. Marina came in, choked him out. As Mox emerged from the crowd with a mic, he said, "None of this is about him. It's all about something bigger, and he's the one doing it because no one else will or can. Yuta saved with a hammer, but everyone ran. Mox confronted him, though, daring Wheeler to use it. Of course, he didn't. Bryan attacked Mox. It became a brawl. Commentary pointed out no one touched Yuta. Wheeler then grabbed the mic, saying he's not a child. He's his own man. He can make his own decisions. Then he challenged his partners to a tag match with Bryan. I shit you not. The graphic for this was up 10 seconds after this random occurrence and surprise challenge, and it was made at the very end of the show. Why can AEW not get this shit right? It defies logic to such an immense degree that you'd be able to create a graphic that quickly in literal seconds. It's purely ridiculous. You don't need the graphic. That graphic being in the bottom corner of the screen for 5 seconds at the end of the show is not bringing a single additional viewer next week. Just be more logical. Keep that shit off. If you want to do that at, like, if the challenge is made at 9 and then you refer back to it at 9:15, you have a graphic, totally fine. But to have that happen in this case at like 10:29 and then at 10:29 and 10 seconds to have the graphic up is just utterly ridiculous. In terms of the angle, there seems to be some type of like reveal or admission or something that's still to come, but Mox is being so vague about it that I'm not sure how much it is creating anticipation for the regular viewer. It can't be another wrestler above Mox. That wouldn't make any sense. I figured it would be a legend, but most of them, candidly, are on WWE deals that prevent them from going to AEW. That's why I keep coming back to the Shane McMahon of it all in this spot. And while we've discussed that a literal one-off appearance for Shane in AEW would be interesting just for like the shits and giggles of it happening, him being behind an angle like this would be a massively odd fit in reality and in kayfabe, especially coming off of AEW signing a new media rights deal. The most logical answer, I know some of you are going to hate when I say this, the most logical answer, if they were booking this properly, would actually be Tony Khan being the person behind Mox, and Khan doing this to take back control and change the direction of the company. That would tie together the EVP storyline with this and Bryan's full-time retirement. The problem there is Tony has said he won't be a TV character, even if he's gone back on that. And as we've discussed before, AEW is a babyface company with Tony as a babyface owner, and it would seem illogical to that end. At the same time, it would be the exact type of shock to the system, no pun intended for Undisputed Era fans out there, but it would be the exact type of shock to the system that AEW might actually need to turn around its ratings and attendance. Can you imagine Khan leading this Jon Moxley type of group, and then you have Kenny Omega come back, and somehow, I don't know how the hell it would happen, but he and Kota Ibushi and the Young Bucks, they're baby faces, and there's internal struggle for the soul of AEW. That would actually be interesting. The post-match overall was fine. I'm not particularly excited about the match next week. I do assume it ends with Yuta turning on Danielson and linking back up with Mox, given he was talking about being a man making his own decisions. That would be the perfect setup to attack Bryan here. On Collision, the TNT title was on the line for some reason. Jack Perry defending against Minoru Suzuki, who answered an open challenge. He won this match by countout and retained the title in 8 minutes. Suzuki entered 2-7 in AEW singles matches. Now he's 2-8. His wins are over the Butcher and QT Marshall, that latter one in 2022. Now look, Suzuki is Suzuki, but as a challenger, it was silly. And the way they're booking him is absolutely ridiculous. The whole reason for this was so Katsuyori Shibata could save Suzuki from a post-match attack. Shibata confronted Perry when he arrived at Dynamite, and he challenged him for Wrestle Dream. Perry said he'd think about it, turned around, punched him, and accepted the match. Not sure you could possibly put together a weaker build for a pay-per-view title match than that. Why have this on Wrestle Dream when it would have been just fine for television? On Dynamite, Private Party beat Iron Savages with gin and juice in like a minute. Isaiah Cassidy reminded that they promised to win the tag team titles at the beginning of the year before the year was out, and they would be the next champions. Then he called out the Young Bucks, referring back to the second Dynamite ever when they got that surprise upset win. The Bucks entered somehow already in ring gear, despite the supposedly being spontaneous. Obviously, they teased but declined the challenge and walked out. Perry then attacked along with the Bucks before Shibata saved. Then Christopher Daniels came out because he's still involved in this for some reason, and he set a trios match for Rampage because I guess he has more power than the EVPs these days. So let me get this straight. Private Party twice gets their asses kicked by Mox's crew. Then they get destroyed by them in a trios match. Then they squash 2 jobbers. Then they challenge for the tag team titles. Then they get a trios match with a different partner from the one that they were fighting Mox's crew with. And presumably the title match is going to happen after that, right? In what world are they deserving of the opportunity other than because they beat the Bucks 5 years ago and have done absolute dick since? When we talk about AEW's lacking logic and faulty creative, this shit here is the paradigm of that. On Dynamite, Darby Allin cut a tape promo on a dilapidated car, remembering why some guys were spitting on the back of his head back when he was a kid. He recalled trying to fight the dude despite him holding a switchblade, I guess because he's a badass. The comparison being Mox and his crew. Darby said he understands if people lose faith in him, saying he wants to be the face of the company, but all he can do is fight. He promised to be at WrestleDream with an open challenge for anyone in the locker room to step up because he has nothing left to lose. Great promo from Darby. I said it a few weeks ago. He is so much better taped instead of live. Whether it's nerves, speaking in front of a crowd, or just the calmness that comes with him in a setting like this, or maybe just seeing him not wear the Daisy Dukes and black leggings makes him more believable. But dude needs to change his ring gear. The open challenge can obviously go in numerous ways. It's impossible to predict. Hangman Page actually makes some sense if he's not on the card. Swerve Strickland returning for 2 Seattle guys to fight in Tacoma. That would work as well, especially if Darby losing is the goal. On Dynamite, the International Championship was on the line. Will Ospreay defending against Ricochet. There was a sit-down interview with them in like the lobby of an office or a hotel or something in front of an elevator. It was really odd. It added context to their match for new viewers, but only 2 short clips were aired on TV. You had to go to YouTube to watch it. Ricochet showed some passion. As usual, his promos, what he said, lacked believability. This opened Dynamite. Ospreay warmed up with Kyle Fletcher before Don Callis interrupted, saying he needed to talk. Ospreay said later, because, he has a match. Callis said, okay, he has to fly out with Fletcher anyway. Why would someone need to leave the arena 2 minutes into the start of a 5th-year anniversary show if that was the only reason they were there in the first place? Why would Callis try to talk to Ospreay if he had to leave the arena anyway seconds later? It's just so frustrating. Anyway, let's just get to the start of the match. They opened with a callback using an identical gymnastics routine to their prior match, ending with the double superhero landing. That one was rightly panned, even if the rest of the match was awesome. This one was the same dudes, but older and slower. Didn't exactly live up to it. Ricochet did a leaping hurricanrana off the barricade. Ospreay hit a Spanish fly back inside and an Oz cutter on the ring apron. Will flipped out of a hurricanrana, but ate an Oz cutter from Rick. Ospreay flipped double birds for no reason whatsoever. Ricochet had a great counter of Hidden Blade into a backslide bomb. They did a sequence of Falcon Arrow counter into a cutter, Hidden Blade counter into a flip bomb, into Styles Clash, another Oz cutter, third Hidden Blade attempt was reversed. Ricochet hit a Shooting Star Press. Ospreay countered Vertigo into an unsold Poison Rana, into another unsold Poison Rana, with Ospreay hitting Hidden Blade and falling on top of Ricochet, then wiggling his body so his shoulders were on the mat for a double count 1, 2, 3 with all 4 shoulders on the canvas. This was rightly, by rule, announced as a draw. Ospreay and Ricochet both demanded it be restarted, so Justin Roberts announced it so from Tony. Ospreay landed a Hidden Blade seconds later, only for Konosuke Takeshita to attack him for the DQ. Then he hit Ricochet with Blue Thunder Bomb. Now, I generally like that AEW runs draws on a semi-regular basis. I wasn't a huge fan of the draw here, but in restarting the match, I accepted it because it was a gimmick to keep Ricochet strong, I assumed, because he was about to get beat. But running a DQ literal seconds after the restart is 2 bullshit finishes in the same match. And that was just far too much schmaz for something promoted as heavily as this. The bright side, if you remember, is I didn't love this match being hot-shotted for the show in the first place. I thought the feud should have built slowly over time to a more monumental match, given how many people wanted to see it. So AEW did successfully, I don't want to say make this, I guess, forgettable, but they made it unimportant in the grand scheme. They'll be able to use Ospreay telling Ricochet he had him beat before the DQ in future storylines. But the problem is Ricochet is actually the one who needed a moment here to make it believable that he could beat Ospreay. In both potential falls, Ospreay was the one on top, having hit Hidden Blade. The draw was happenstance the way he fell, but Ricochet was the one who took the move and was getting covered. That should have been thought through a lot better. Ricochet didn't come out of this with any real momentum when he could have, if let's say it was Ricochet who hit a move and fell on top of Ospreay and they got double pinned. Then Ospreay hit the Hidden Blade and you got the DQ. It would have been one for each of them. In terms of going Ospreay Takeshita, I mean, that's going to be an absolute banger when it happens. Clearly, Takeshita has main event level talent. They're two of the best in the world right now. But they're going to start this with a triple threat for the title at Wrestle Dream. As far as the match itself, look, the opening was shit. Some of the sequences were incredible athletically. I don't have any bias against this style of match. I generally love Ospreay wrestling. I generally love Ricochet wrestling as well. But I don't know, it just felt like it underwhelmed throughout. Like they were really trying to do something and trying hard to do it and forgetting about like all the other important aspects of a match, like, you know, selling and kind of telling more of a story. The story is, oh, wow, we each did great moves and the other is impressed at the, like, it's only so much that you can kind of do when that's all you have to work on. It was spotty in parts too. It never really felt like it got into a flow. If you're looking for a grade, I think I'm at 3.75 stars, B+, especially given the finishes. I was at an A-. I thought it could reach an A. I thought it was going to reach an A. But then you got the draw. Then you got the DQ. And then you go back and think about the match, factoring those in. And it's just, again, it's not something you'll ever watch again. And to be an A or higher usually needs to be a match that you're going to be interested in watching another time. On Rampage, Takeshita beat Angelico in 9 minutes. Why? No reason whatsoever. On Collision, Hangman Page beat Jeff Jarrett in a lumberjack strap match. This was not the main event for some reason. The best part of the match by far was Juice Robinson dressed like a lumberjack, wearing a plaid shirt, a diaper for some reason, and then suspenders. Why a diaper? No idea. But he looked so ridiculous that it popped me. It popped a lot of fans too. Jarrett did a dive off the top rope ringside and like 5 fans chanted Double J, which also popped me, but it really appeared to annoy him. Karen saved her husband from getting beaten with a strap. Then all the face lumberjacks beat Hangman with straps. He won by low-blowing Jarrett with the referee's back turned, even though this was a no DQ match, mind you, and then hitting Deadeye. Bang Bang Gang got mixed up with him after the bell. This is the most disappointed I've been in an AEW match in quite some time, because usually, even if there's lacking storytelling or a couple botches or gnarly moments or something, the matches always deliver. This was a disaster from a booking standpoint. This guy just went to literal war with Swerve Strickland, and you turn around and have him get beat up by 9 guys only to have him sneak away against a 57-year-old Jeff Jarrett because of a low blow that you disguise because you think it might be a disqualification in a strap lumberjack match. Legitimately had high expectations for this. I thought the backstage segments between them were strong. Jarrett impressed in his match against Danielson. This was just, ugh. On Dynamite, Hangman fought Juice. The Guns were ready to cut a promo backstage when Page quickly attacked them from behind with a chair. Robinson started using a strap. They fought into the crowd. Juice hit a terrific cannonball through a barricade. Looked awesome. Hangman rolled through a flying crossbody, doing a fallaway slam into the turnbuckles. Juice sold it like hell. Robinson countered an avalanche Deadeye attempt with a powerbomb. Hangman ultimately grabbed the referee to do a mule kick when Juice again prevented Deadeye, coming back with a buckshot lariat for the win. This was extremely limited in terms of build, but it was far better than the Jarrett match that had extensive build. Obviously, Juice is younger and better, plus the prior stipulation was convoluted, but still, this was much more entertaining. It was the most entertained I've been by a Juice Robinson match in quite some time. It was actually great to see him like wrestle singles for a change instead of just acting an ass. Hangman wrapped his belt around Juice's neck after the bell, literally hung him over the ropes in the post-match. That led to Jay White's music hitting. He attacked Hangman from behind all the way into the crowd, where he speared him through a table that was not set up that well. White looked to be in fantastic shape. It was a really hot, unexpected return, though he has been healthy for a while. I think from start to finish, the best part of hour 1 on Wednesday night. On Dynamite, Mercedes Moné and Camille were backstage. She called for a package of Dynamite's best moments, which were, of course, her limited highlights in AEW. Then she repeated what we just saw in the package, saying AEW's future is bright with her. MVP interrupted and handed over a business card before leaving. It's been a literal month since Mercedes has done anything, 2 months since she's done anything that mattered. And she did nothing here either. Doubt the MVP stuff will result in anything. Why does she need him? She has the EVPs giving her whatever she wants, if you're sticking with story. MVP was set to make an announcement that was promoted before the show when Prince Nana interrupted him. Nana threatened to lace up his boots again because he used to be a wrestler and fight him. MVP pointed behind him, basically like, look over your shoulder, unveiling Shelton Benjamin, who got a really nice pop before they just walked off. Obviously, the tease here is that they're going to introduce the group one at a time. Bobby Lashley will be next. I'm thinking it's going to be next week because they're going to want to do it against WWE, right? Wouldn't that make sense? Maybe they'll hold it off past that. On Rampage, Willow Nightingale beat Taya Valkyrie in 11 minutes. This had brief build from last week. Willow hit a pounce and Dr. Bomb for the win. Strangely, Deonna Purrazzo wasn't ringside with Taya, even though they're now in a group that was just established. That did not make any sense. On Collision, Chris Statlander was backstage without Stokely Hathaway, saying she wasn't going to beg for an opportunity or feel sorry for herself, even though she beat Willow and deserves opportunities. This was basically an explanation of some kind for AEW again failing to capitalize after a big match, having no booking for her following the street fight. On Dynamite, Britt Baker fought Serena Deeb. There was no build for this outside of Deeb's challenge, which again was for no reason. Baker came through the crowd holding a beach-sized terrible towel. Mariah May watched from ringside, even though both of these women just recently lost title matches. Britt countered Detox with an air raid crash. Then she hit another avalanche style for a false finish and countered into Lockjaw for the win. Baker here was better than against Monet, but that was mostly due to working with Deeb. Serena attacked Britt's knee after the bell. She did the Serenity Lock. Queen Aminata ran down to zero reaction for the save. I know they were feuding on like Collision and Rampage, but I kind of thought it was over. This was a microcosm of AEW's women's division over the last 5 years, all of it in a single segment. Only one match on the show without a real storyline. Baker being the featured woman, getting a win. A Britt match going twice as long as an actual title bout last week. A post-match attack and save for no real reason. Britt potentially fighting Mariah for the title after losing to Mercedes for the smaller title would be nonsensical. Now, that's clearly not next because Mariah talked shit about Willow backstage, saying she continuously gets title shots, wins them, then loses them immediately. Nightingale got in her face. May shoved her back. They got separated, so that's probably for Wrestle Dream, and Baker is maybe for the show after that. But again, when that's all you're doing with the women on the show, and you're not bringing Toni Storm back, I know she's wrestling over in Japan. I'm just using that as an example. You're not bringing her back or making a splash or starting a new feud or doing something interesting, and this is all you're doing. This was, again, a microcosm of AEW women's booking over the last 5 years on Dynamite. On Collision, the Learning Tree beat the Conglomeration in 9 minutes. Chris Jericho took a J-Driller, but as Mark Briscoe went to do a froggy bow on Chris through a table, Big Bill took him off the top with a chokeslam through the table, and Jericho covered for the win. Maybe I'm misremembering. I thought J-Driller was Briscoe's finisher. Why would he go for like an additional move after that? That was notable because Jericho pinned the ROH champion. On Dynamite, we had TV time with Jericho. That was the second full segment of the show. Jericho took a shot at AEW's haters because of the new media rights deal and gave himself credit. I thought it was funny he gave himself credit, apropos because he was the first big star signed and had a great reign as Le Champion, the demo god, the whole deal. But of course, AEW just signs a TV deal, with which everyone expected they would. And they have to have Jericho or someone like take a shot at people on TV because. Anyway, Jericho said he was moving on from the Ocho. He wanted to become the Nueve. He challenged Briscoe for the ROH title at Wrestle Dream. Literally zero pop for the challenge. But the fans did pop when Briscoe entered. He said a lot of words only to accept the challenge. He wanted the notch in his belt of beating Jericho. Jericho said Mark can't beat him, but maybe his brother Jay could have. Briscoe slugged him, saying, "Take my brother's name out of your mouth." Then he threw the mic at him. The mention of Jay did add some heat to this, and it was missing from the interaction prior. Was it necessary? That is only for Mark to decide. Not going to give my opinion on how he should feel about, using his brother in a storyline. Obviously, he approved of it before they did the segment. The match is reasonable. It's a fine booking. The segment was lackluster. Not sure why Jericho needs to be continuously challenging for titles. Though to be fair, Briscoe beating Jericho would enhance his resume. as champion, and he has been consistently over for a bit now, so maybe that's all the reasoning we needed here. On Collision, Jamie Hayter fought Saraya in a Saraya's Rules match. Saraya got a free slap to start what was basically a 2-on-1 handicap with Harley Cameron. Saraya used a VCR and a keyboard, then did 4 unprotected steel pan shots to Hayter's head. Some toy cars were put on a table. Why? Who knows? Hayter did execute a nice catch power slam off the ropes. Then she was tussling with Harley on the ropes when Hayter got hit with a steel chair crashing through the table as Cameron landed ribs first into a second table, looking like she got absolutely destroyed. Gnarly bump for her. Hayter drove Saraya through a table and then, I shit you not, hit a tombstone pile driver on someone who was medically disqualified from wrestling due to a neck injury. She ended with Hayter the strong lariat. The win was obviously expected, some decent spots, some ridiculousness, but not bad. The return for Hayter, though, has been so underwhelming. It's to the point I want to call it straight up botched. AEW fans were foaming at the mouth for her to get back, talking about how she was the missing piece to send this division to new heights. And for good reason, because she's a great wrestler and she has personality. So after 15 months being sidelined, she returns on the pre-show of All In and then has fought 3 matches since against Cameron, Rob, and Renegade, and now Saraya. I'm not saying she should have been hot-shotted to a title win, but she absolutely should have come in hot against one of those champions or a top-notch talent. Can you imagine if she came in against Mercedes? I mean, that would be incredible. If you asked me to pick the worst possible return scenario for her, it might have been this, given how bad fans wanted her back and how poorly she's been used. I mean, why? She hasn't even been making waves on Dynamite. It's just ridiculous. On Collision, Hologram beat Dralistico and the Beast Mortos in 10 minutes. Lucha Showcase, some really cool spots as you would expect. Dralistico hit a springboard Canadian Destroyer before Hologram won with a cool crucifix pinning combination. Roosh came out after the bell as Dralistico and Mortos were shoving each other. He put his arms around them, and then they attacked Hologram to form, I guess, a new La Faction Ingobernable. The match was fun. I was left completely scratching my head after the finish. Roosh had basically been pledging to Don Callis' family like he was a guy rushing a fraternity for months and had gotten in his good graces recently. I think he got accepted into the group because he got a win or he beat someone up or something recently. Yet now that storyline is just axed and he's leading a new faction without the other guys who were in it previously, who are now just missing from television. As far as the booking of Roosh goes,
snip, snap, snip, snap, snip, snap.
It's been like that for the last year, and it's just maddening. I'm not even sure what this group could possibly accomplish together. Mortos never wins. Dralistico is hardly on TV. Hell, even Roosh never wins when he's put in big spots.
Stop trying to make fetch happen. It's not going to happen.
Market zero.
On Rampage, the Acclaimed beat 2 jobbers in 2 minutes. There was a dumb back and forth promo with MXM Collection about Max Caster's jacket on Collision. MXM brought out a bunch of male models for no reason whatsoever. Then they unveiled a guy named Hans. It was obvious who he was the entire time, wearing Caster's altered jacket. It had a heart cut out on the chest, some bedazzling, and the back said, Bratinum Max Caster, best dressed alive, instead of Platinum Max Caster, best wrestler alive, as if that's some shot at him. Then MXM started drooling over this guy as he took off the jacket and flexed. Again, very obvious who he was. They wanted him to touch tips, but instead, he pushed off the hood and it was Billy Gunn, as you would expect. He revealed himself. The Acclaimed came out and MXM ran away. Without exaggeration, this was one of the worst segments in AEW history. Not counting matches or anything else, just segments. You had the Cody Rhodes, Anthony Ogogo weigh-in, their Britt Baker cheeseburger segment, the Nightmare Collective stuff, all of that comes to mind. This was utter shit, especially for something that was dragged out for no reason over multiple weeks. I don't even want to talk about it any longer.
0.0.
That is one big pile of shit.
On Rampage, House of Black beat Action Andretti and Leo Rush in 9 minutes. Andretti acted a fool during this, continuing whatever gimmick they're doing with him as Top Flight struggles. He tagged in right as Rush was about to hit a finisher. Right as Rush was about to hit a finisher, Lio Rush, taking Black Mass in the end. He also threw a bottle of water at Brody King after the bell, only to get murked in the corner. I was like, oh, maybe he's joining House of Black. I'm not sure they need another guy, but maybe. Then on Collision, King beat Andretti in 90 seconds with a cannonball. The Righteous attacked Top Flight Crew after the bell. Why? No reason. I'm realizing I forgot to mention they did cut a promo on Rampage, but I don't think they cut that promo about Top Flight if memory serves. Also on Rampage, Anna Jay beat Robin Renegade in less than 3 minutes. She cut a backstage promo wondering where she fit in these days. In AEW, she looked really crisp in the ring. The Japanese excursion definitely helped her development. It was good to see her wrestle like that. And I got to tell you, arrow is pointing up on Anna Jay. Maybe it was just one match and maybe that won't continue, but if she's able to wrestle like that and increase her charisma a little bit more, then I think she's actually a factor in the AEW women's division. So look, that wraps up AEW this week. Clearly lots of positives. There was some good stuff, but also just a lot of faulty booking, nonsensical storytelling, convoluted stuff. And it's just plaguing AEW these days. And that's why I was mentioning earlier, I don't see how they could add more television when they're already struggling to do 5 hours. I think even going down to 4 isn't going to help them that much. But look, we will see what happens in the future. So now that we've wrapped up AEW, we promised we would evaluate the ratings for NXT's debut on the CW, and of course the AEW 5th year anniversary episode, which on its own, was important because it's a 5th year anniversary, but they also had 2 major matches. I mean, look, Will Ospreay, Ricochet, and Bryan Danielson, Kazuchika Okada, even without build for the latter, those are matches that people should be tuning in to watch, right? So we're going to go to AEW second. We're going to start with NXT because it airs first. It airs on Tuesday. That show on Tuesday brought in 895,000 viewers and a 0.26 demo for the CW. That is the 3rd largest viewership and 6th highest demo since NXT debuted on USA Network. They had those 3 weeks. I think 2 of them were unopposed, then 1 against Dynamite, but not counting those weeks. The 3rd largest viewership since. Basically, this was a monster number on its own, but you have to put it in greater context. And for some unknown reason, this was left out from some prominent people who were discussing this rating this week. They did nearly 900,000 viewers despite going against the vice presidential debate, which did over 40 million plus 2 MLB wildcard games and I think 2 WNBA playoff games, though neither of them involved Caitlin Clark. That rating, if you did not have that competition, would be over 1 million and better than 0.30 without all of that. It's actually an insane number given there were far fewer stars on the show than the episode I attended with obviously John Cena, The Undertaker, Cody Rhodes, Asuka, all those people. I mean, they pretty much just had CM Punk. No offense to The Miz. Bianca and Jade weren't really announced, even though they kind of were. It was really just CM Punk and NXT. And they did 895 against the vice presidential debate, which did 40 plus million, 2 MLB wildcard games, and again, WNBA playoff games as well. The CW was thrilled with that number. But the question is going to be what it looks like over the next 2 weeks for a few different reasons. The first is NXT remains on the road in St. Louis next week, so it's not going to be home, but it's also going to be in a smaller venue without CM Punk, who is a top draw. The second hour of NXT next week is actually going to air head-to-head with Dynamite. That's moving nights due to the MLB playoffs, but it's starting at 9 instead of 8. They are running a Title Tuesday show, but what was interesting is 2 parts of that. 1, they're running Title Tuesday 4 days before Wrestle Dream. 2, no title matches were announced for the show. So, I mean, they're going to be promoting it heavily, but I don't exactly know what that AEW show is going to look like. Point being, no matter what, NXT next week is not going to be a regular episode. We're not going to be able to get a unopposed number of any kind. That should come on October 15th. And while there will be MLB playoff games against it, not having 40 million people watching a huge political event and not having other wrestling competition will provide a more reasonable evaluation of the rating. It's actually pretty shitty timing for NXT as a debut on a new network, just given all these things happening simultaneously. But look, that's when the contract ran out. They didn't really have a choice. I still maintain, and I said this earlier in the show, I've said it since the deal was announced, I believe the CW got a huge bargain on NXT. Even if the ratings do come down a bit, which they will, a little bit at least, it's going to be the most consistent draw on their network. Yes, they have individual sports and individual games might do better ratings, but over 52 weeks, this is going to be the ratings driver for the CW. And if you look at what AEW got for its programming, given WWE is the premier brand, it's kind of astounding they weren't able to get like $50 million a year for NXT, despite it being the third brand. So those were the ratings for NXT. We're going to compare them to AEW Dynamite, but obviously it's not head-to-head. There's no winner or loser. I actually need to pull them up here because I did not know the AEW Dynamite ratings when I began this segment. Okay, got it here. The rating for AEW Dynamite, the 5th anniversary of the show. This is actually pretty surprising. 680,000 viewers and a 0.20 in the 1849 demo. That's the lowest rating in a month and second lowest rating in the last 2 months, which is notable because there have been some real low ratings of late. It's the 5th time Dynamite has done 0.2 or worse in the demo this year, and that's not a number that they had approached really even close in 2023 when they were doing 0.3s pretty regularly, or even on a low end, 0.25. So yeah, for a 5th anniversary show with Will Ospreay and Ricochet and Bryan Danielson and Kazuchika Okada and other promoted matches and expectations for, maybe surprises, not to mention the fact that you might have expectations for debuts and returns, given the fact that it was a 5th anniversary show. That's rough. Now, look, Dynamite had competition of its own. I believe it also went against MLB playoff games. I don't think there was WNBA competition. I could be wrong. But fact of the matter is, it was not up against the vice presidential debate. So the fact that you had NXT, I know a debut, I know network TV, like that's all factual differences between the two. But the fact that it did more than 200,000 viewers and 6/10 of demo, better than Dynamite, despite being up against the vice presidential debate, that is absolutely wild. It shows how good the NXT rating was. It also kind of shows how disappointing the Dynamite rating was. Now, what's really important about this, and we've been telling you this for weeks and really months as well, is the rating kind of doesn't matter anymore for really either brand, but especially for Dynamite. They just signed a new deal. Now, what they need to do over time is ensure their ratings improve and that this isn't the new norm, and certainly that things don't go lower than this with any regularity, but they're comfortable for the next 3 years, right? They just signed a contract. There's no clauses in it that they need to stay above a certain rating to get their money. So they're pretty comfortable. So the whole ratings conversation now, especially with this deal being announced for pretty much every show, is mostly irrelevant. I think it's worth tracking on occasion, really high numbers, really low numbers. Are there reasons that's happening? Are shows losing interest? Are they gaining interest? There are things that can be taken away from the ratings discussion. But in terms of the sky falling or coffers opening up based on an individual rating, that's all done. All of WWE shows have new deals. All of AEW shows, pretty much it seems, have new deals as well. So folks, that wraps up this edition of the Getting Over Wrestling podcast, an extended show, as we suspected, given the huge news this week, and of course the NXT debut on the CW. I appreciate all of you for listening. Please do not forget, I forgot to mention this off the top of the show. That is my fault. We have a WWE Bad Blood Ultimate Preview potentially waiting for your ear holes in our podcast feed if you have not heard it yet. And Saturday night, shortly after WWE Bad Blood goes off the air, we will be back with our 3rd episode of the week. That's 6 episodes, by the way, in 2 weeks, because we have that Mr. McMahon special that you can also listen to. But this Saturday, we will have WWE Bad Blood Instant Analysis. Make sure you do not miss it. On the way out, allow the Silver King to remind you that the Getting Over Wrestling podcast
is all about Defy.
So head over to Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Leave a 5-star rating on Apple. Take a little extra time. Leave a 5-star written review. If you do, we'll read it here on the show. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube at Getting Overcast and follow on Twitter at Getting Overcast for episode drops, news, analysis, highlights, all of that good stuff. And please also remember,
I happen to love the number 5.
I hope you do as well, because for $5 a month or $50 for the entire year, you can become an official Getting Over head. Just visit buymeacoffee.com/gettingover. Sign up. You will get the fastest 5 minutes in professional wrestling, instant reaction audio to every major TV show, and exclusive news posts on Fridays. Again, buymeacoffee.com/gettingover. I appreciate all of you sticking with us here on the Getting Over Wrestling Podcast. This is the Silver King signing off and leaving you with just 3 final words. Bye for now.